All right, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Samantha, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar titled Improving Classroom Behavior, Expectations, Tolerances, and Consequences. So if you're having any problems, you can't hear us, you need us to talk a little louder, let us know, and just in the chat box, and I will do what we can to get those issues resolved. We are going to go ahead and get started, and I am going to turn it over to today's presenters, Courtney and Joanne.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Courtney Daly, like Samantha said. I'm a national training consultant here at Boys Town. Just a little bit about me. My background is in education. I taught for over 10 years, and something kind of interesting is that I have a unique experience that I was able to teach in various grade levels. So I taught high school, and I also taught in elementary as well. And so I've really enjoyed being able to experience and teach kids at all various different levels of their development and seeing the similarities and the differences that they bring. So I'm glad to be here with you guys today to talk about tolerances and consequences and expectations. It's something that I believe in a lot, and I've just really seen that when those things are clear, students really succeed so much more. And so I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. Joanne?
Good afternoon. I'm Joanne Flaxbeard, and I come to Boys Town after working for 32 years in the public schools, most of which I spent teaching in elementary in a general ed classroom. When I think about my first years of teaching, I actually taught in a multi-grade classroom. I taught both third and fourth graders, and I had 35 students. And I was lucky to learn early on that if things were going to run smoothly, I needed to go by that old adage of I meant what I said and I said what I meant. So I made very clear expectations with my students. And I noticed as time went on and my class sizes got smaller, I actually had a higher percentage of students with unique challenges. But then if I kept to those clear expectations and tolerances and consequences, everyone in my classroom had the opportunity to be successful. So that worked very well for me.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here as we begin. Take a little bit about us here at Boys Town. Excuse me. Our mission here at Boys Town is changing the way America cares for children, families, and communities by promoting and providing a continuum of care that strengthens mind, body, and spirit. And that's what we're about here at Boys Town. So we're really looking at the way that we treat families and communities and children, and just changing the way that we address children's behavioral needs. So as we continue on here, the models that we present are social-emotional based behavior models. And so we're really looking at the social-emotional needs of students. And if you are at all familiar with applied behavioral analysis, then a lot of the strategies and the things that we mention here today and just in general will sound pretty familiar to you. Also, as we go along, an important thing to mention is that here at Boys Town we have multi-tiered intervention. And as you know, in Joanne, with 32 years experience, I have 10 years, but they pale in comparison, it seems like, to Joanne's 32 years. But, you know, kids come to us at all different levels, I mean, right?
Absolutely.
And so we've seen, you know, kids who come to us with just very few needs. They come in, they know what they're supposed to do, they're pretty well can succeed in whatever the expectations in various environments. But then we get those students who come in and it's like blank slate sometimes, and they just come in and have a lot of struggles and a lot of needs. And what we want to do is be able to provide the level of support that each specific child needs. And so here at Boys Town, the interventions that we provide are multi-tiered, and that's really nice because all kids aren't the same, and we want to make sure and meet the whole child. Also, our methods are research-proven methods, so you will find that we use evidence to support the strategies that we use. So here at both Joanne and I are with national training here at Boys Town, and we have the unique opportunity of being able to travel around throughout the country and visit different schools, work with educators and administrators, and even go in and observe classrooms. And so we really enjoy being able to meet with different communities. And part of what we do here at National Training is we work to strengthen communities and to empower schools and really want to make our schools here in the United States strong. And so we're glad to partner with different schools and communities. And it's neat to see some of the similarities in the students and in the communities, and then each of the individual strengths and challenges that we encounter as well.
So our goals for this afternoon. First, we're going to discuss how to effectively communicate expectations. You know, when we let students know exactly what we expect, it sets them up for success. Next, we're going to discuss how our behavior demonstrates our tolerances. We can always tell students what we want, but sometimes our behavior can send mixed messages. Then we're going to talk about the ABCs of behavior, the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequences, and how being able to identify those can help guide us to help solve some problem behaviors. And then finally, we're going to take a look at consequences, both positive and negative, to shape behavior, so that we can get our students from where they are to where we want them to be. So let's begin. We have a question for you to type into the chat box. When you were a student, did you follow the school and classroom rules and expectations? Why or why not? Go ahead and type it in your chat box.
We have an answer from Mary who said that she always followed the rules because she didn't want to get in trouble.
And I can agree with that. I was a very compliant student myself.
Tara has a good point. She said that she always followed the rules because she was an athlete. And I know that's a good motivator for a lot of kids.
That's true. Some of our kids, I think that's the only thing that keeps them tied into school. So it's a great motivator. Oh, we've got lots of answers. Yeah, what do we have? Samantha?
I love it when you guys are participating with this. I liked this one from Susan that said, only when they made sense. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Courtney.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like that's where I fall into, not just when they made sense, but when somebody else cared. That was me. When I was I followed all the rules, except in high school, it was dress code. I didn't really care about the dress code because nobody else cared. And so, in fact, my shorts and my skirts, it seemed like they were so short, they were up to my shoulders. And in fact, I'm a seamstress, and so I even got to make my own dresses and completely decide my hemline. And all that would happen is my parents would roll their eyes, and my teachers would see me every day. No one would say anything. I was an AP student, an honor roll student, and honors classes, but because nobody said anything about my hemline, I wore really short shorts. And so it's really funny. I think there was just too much to do and to concern about. And if my, the adults were sending the message that it didn't matter, I just didn't really worry about it either. So that's funny. That's similar to mine.
And that's interesting because we had someone say that no, they didn't because nobody followed through on it. So, I think that's true for a lot of rules. Mm-hmm. The last thing I wanted to point out, because this is a big motivator, for some kids, other kids don't have this, is their family or their parents. Mm-hmm. Expecting them to follow the rules. So that can be tough, I know, for teachers.
So meaning that some families do expect them and some don't?
Yeah, some families will follow through with the rule. If they get in trouble at school, they'll follow through at home.
Absolutely.
Other kids don't have that. Do you guys have any advice on how to get through those struggles?
Yeah, that's definitely a common struggle that I see. And it's something that I always try to encourage educators is keep partnering with parents. And I understand the struggles. I mean, there are lots. And many of us perhaps have seen parents coming in inebriated or being concerned about what the response was going to be, or if anyone would show up, or the phone number not being the correct one, all kinds of things. We've seen lots over the years. But I still encourage just keep trying, especially in positive ways, because there's just a lot of literature about research out there that says that when we can partner with parents, we're going to get a lot further with the parents and with the kids as well. And so just keep trying with them.
And I would say, too, try to think about where parents are coming from. So many parents, their children struggle in schools because they themselves have had such negative experiences with school. So I just want to re-stress that point that Courtney gave, that keeping those lines of communication open. If you can articulate with parents what your rules and expectations and such is, and you can explain to them the reasons and just get them on board, it's going to help you to be more successful with students.
Yeah, and then just piggybacking on what you said, that for a lot of families, their experience has been negative. So just trying to change that paradigm, beginning with something positive. I was just looking at something before we started a little while ago, and it's a book put out. It's just a book that was advertised on the ASCD website. And it said, start with something positive when you have parent-teacher conferences because it disarms parents. And I just thought that was such a nice way of saying it, starting things off positive. But we have a great continuum just of different answers about the rules, and I really think a lot of them sort of get to what we're looking at. Is it basically, it kind of came down to, did anybody care, and did they make any sense? So there's a University of Pennsylvania study that reported that the majority of communication is transmitted non-verbally. So 70% is transmitted through body language alone. So you can look here, this teacher in our little picture isn't saying a thing, but she's got her hands on her hips, her toes are pointed out, she's got kind of a smirk on her face. So 70% of the message that she's giving is merely with her body language. And then when we go along, we've got here that 23% of it is voice tone. So then she says her message, really? Great job. And so sometimes just that voice tone will convey messages that we may or may not have planned on getting across. And then, shockingly enough, only 7% of the message that we get across is spoken word. So maybe here in our example, the teacher was trying to say, really great job, but that message might have gotten a little mixed when combined with body language and voice tone. And of course, that's, as many of us may have experienced, that's why sometimes email and texting is so difficult, because only 7% of that message actually gets across. But so really looking at this data, it really kind of hones in and gets across that point that actions really might speak louder than words.
Let's go ahead and generate some more discussion. We have another chat question for you to answer. How do you show students that you expect what you say you expect?
Awesome. We have our first answer coming in, and it says, students are expected to be quiet in the hall. If they talk, we stop and wait until everyone is quiet, and then we keep going.
Great response.
Yes. Follow through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sort of like Joanne said, I said it, and I meant it, and I'll follow through with my actions. Nice.
This is exactly what I think we were talking about, but sometimes what teachers forget is Patty says that by example.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I can think of an example myself and when I think about assembly behavior, and that was so important for me in my classroom, that my students were well behaved in assemblies. And I had to make sure that if I expected them to sit down and be quiet, I also had to sit down and be quiet and be engaged in the assembly.
And like you said before, hard to do, right? When sometimes that's the only time you get a chance to see your colleagues.
Exactly.
But that modeling piece is huge, because like it or not, they often watch what we do and will mimic it.
Yeah, I like these couple answers that are coming in too, is consistency.
Yes.
You know, even if you're tired that day, you still need to follow through with all those rules.
Mm-hmm.
Critically important.
We've got a lot of great answers coming through. I like this one. Review the expectation model and make sure students follow through.
Exactly. Just reiterating those expectations and revisiting it is huge. It'll almost is like a filter, a sieve of misbehavior, so to speak, and it just kind of helps set that expectation and filter through some of those unwanted behaviors, and it really demonstrates that follow-through that really is important to you, and students are more likely to meet that expectation.
And I think it's important that a lot of teachers review expectations during those critical times of the year, right after vacations or other But it's also important that to take the time to do it, especially when you see your students are starting to struggle with those expectations.
Exactly. And there was one that, a similar example, but one that I always had in my classroom, in my middle and high school classrooms, that I didn't accept incomplete work. And so sometimes students would forget, and so they try to sneak it on by, and having to have those difficult conversations that this is incomplete. Please take it home, finish it up, no big deal, just turn in tomorrow. It'll be late, but much better late than never, and just making sure and being firm and kind with it. Anything else that we have there, Samantha? Got lots of good stuff coming through. Does that about cover it?
Yeah, that about covers it. A lot of people are just talking about modeling. I like this one. You praise the behavior when you see it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And you guys are getting exactly to where we're going. A lot of what we're going to talk about is just demonstrating through our actions that we like what we're seeing, so to speak. So when we see the good stuff, definitely praising it and focusing more on those positive things, because I think what we focus on is what we're going to more of.
Exactly right.
Very good.
So let's take a look at another example, how we as teachers can potentially change behaviors into what we want. We take a look at this graphic, we see that at the beginning of the day, here are students getting ready to start the day. But if we pay really close attention to everyone, there's really only one student who's doing exactly what we expect him to do, to sit, have his book open, eyes on the teacher, ready to go. And the others are engaged in the iPad, the headphones, or falling asleep. And here is a critical time where we know teachers lose a lot of valuable instructional time just getting kids ready to learn for the day. So if we take a look at the next picture, we can see that the teacher has taken the time to set up those expectations, explain them clearly, and by posting them as well, to let them know that they need to come to class ready to learn, that they're to take their seat right away and put away their technology and start with their morning work right away, we can see a difference in those students' behaviors. Now, all of the students have things put away, they're in their seats, books are open, eyes on teachers, ready to go for the day. So if we teach what we want and use appropriate tolerances, it's more likely students are going to do what we expect them to do.
Exactly. Thanks, Joanne. And so Joanne mentioned tolerances. And tolerances are the difference between what we say we expect and what we allow. So it's sort of what we let slip by, so to speak. And when our tolerances aren't really clear, it's sort of like our expectations are this fence, and students might not know exactly what our tolerances or what our expectations are. So if one day we allow one thing and let some misbehavior slide, and the next day we don't, it's almost like this fence is moving. And what happens is, like the girl in the picture here, we see that students might often walk up to kind of touch that fence to see if it's still there. And I don't know about you, but you very likely might be thinking of a particular student's name, please don't share, or a picture in your head of the ones that are limit testers. I have a very spunky monkey 6.5-year-old daughter, and she is a limit tester. And if at all, if she perceives that these expectations, this fence is not where it said it's supposed to be, she will walk up to it and touch it just to see, just to make sure, and it's like a game. And I sometimes think that when our expectations are unclear or inconsistent, it almost seems like we take that fence and turn it into a rubber band, and we've got kids that will just come up and fling it to watch it boing. And so we definitely don't want to do that. So when we continue on and look, it is important on where our tolerances are. So, what our tolerances are is just that difference between what we allow and what we don't. And it's really important to not have too high of tolerances, because when our tolerance is really high, it means we're allowing a lot of behavior in which might be considered unacceptable and allowing it to happen in class. And when we see classrooms with high tolerances, we might see just a lot of off-task behavior, words that might not be appropriate, students not really behaving in a way that we might deem it.
And this reminds me of a classroom that you walk into where it seems like anything goes.
Yeah.
Kids are allowed to do whatever they want, whenever they want.
Exactly. And then they walk into other classes and are shocked when those are not, it's not the wild, wild west. But on the other hand, the other extreme is having extremely low tolerances where almost nothing is allowed. And tolerances are just not very reasonable. It's almost like kids aren't allowed to, you said it well once before, Joanne, kind of like like kids aren't almost allowed to even breathe.
Right. It can be very stifling.
Yeah. It's almost like kids aren't allowed to be creative. We definitely want kids to have the chance to be creative and to be individuals and have a safe place to learn. So with that being said, while it is important to have low tolerances, it's important to have reasonably low tolerances, appropriate tolerances, where kids are allowed to grow and learn and be individuals, but where we create a safe, predictable environment by not allowing some of those negative behaviors that get in the way.
And this is almost like if you liken it to Goldilocks. This is that just right porridge.
Yeah, right. Nicely said. Awesome. So as we're looking at tolerances, it's important that tolerances reinforce our expectations. So we should only allow those things that we say we do, like you guys mentioned at the beginning, our first chat question. We want to see that follow through. We want to make sure that those rules make sense and that our tolerances and what we allow align with our expectations. That being said, our second bullet point here is, if you find that we're tolerating things that are kind of against the rules, so to speak, or not meeting up with your expectations, it might be important to reevaluate your rules. So maybe the rules don't make sense. And so we want to make sure that what we allow and our expectations do line up. And when I think of that, I think of technology. I've seen in schools posted all over, no technology, no cell phones in class, all of these signs. But what you see in the actual practices is just put your cell phones on silent and put them up, and it's absolutely acceptable. So my thought is, if that's what we're tolerating, change the rule. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable rule. Cell phones up and on silent. So just making sure everything matches up. So, and in that way, just being realistic with what we expect. And then also our tolerances help to create a safe, predictable environment where kids are free to grow and learn, and we can really have an academically focused environment.
So if actions do speak louder than words, how do we effectively communicate our expectations to students? Well, our response is what truly matters. When a student behaves in a desired way, what do? Well, we have options. We can always use praise, very powerful. We can use positive comments, such as, great job, I like how you did, yada, yada. We can give positive consequences, maybe some little reward that lets students know you appreciate them doing the right thing. Or we could even do nothing, because it is what we expect students to do anyway. On the other hand, what do we do when students have negative, undesired behaviors? Well, we have options there as well. We can always address it non-verbally, the teacher look or a stern hand to or finger to your mouth to ask them to be quiet. We can use one-on-one prompts, and that means instead of addressing an entire classroom with a prompt, maybe doing a personal prompt with a student, getting up close and personal, or giving them a special signal to help prompt them when they're doing something that's not quite what is desired. We can have a conversation with them, or we can go the route of yelling, pointing fingers, or again, we have an option of doing nothing and just hope that the behavior just goes away on its own.
Lots of options, and hopefully you're seeing that in each of these lists there are some that might be more effective than others.
Absolutely.
Joanne, can I stop you real quick?
Absolutely.
And I don't know if this is the right time to address this or if we should do that later, but Lori has a specific question. If you have any suggestions on tolerances, expectations, or consequences that can help address habitual truancy. Habitual truancy.
That's a good question.
They look kind of stumped, Lori, so maybe
we can think about that and get to that in the question section at the end.
I think that's perfect.
That's a great
Thank you for that great question, Lori.
Wonderful. Well, then how can we communicate tolerances? Well, it's very important that we want to reinforce appropriate behavior. And just as we mentioned before, praise is very important. Letting kids know right away and acknowledging when they're doing the exact right thing. But then we also want to praise approximations of behavior. When I think back of my students and expecting them to be very well behaved during assemblies, one of the behaviors I expected of them was to be sitting quietly during the whole assembly. Well, of course, I'd praise those kids who could sit the whole time, but also knowing that a first grader or fifth grader, any elementary student, might not be able to make it an entire assembly by sitting on their bottom. So I might praise the student for getting through part of the assembly on their bottom and just encourage them to work for a little bit longer time every time they do an assembly.
And it's fun to see when we do recognize that even those approximations to behavior, those little bits, to see them almost puff up, you know, in that smile, and to see like, whoa, that I did do a good job. And again, it just changes that paradigm of, yeah, we're going to find the good stuff too.
Exactly. It's so motivating if they know, okay, I'm not just going to be praised when I do the exact right thing, but the teacher's going to know I'm trying to get where I need to go.
Exactly.
And then another thing we can do is use positive consequences. Again, some small kind of reward to let kids know that you appreciate that they've done the right thing. Well, we also want to make sure that we address misbehavior, so we don't ignore those things. And when we address them, we want to keep them small. Maybe giving a consequence that's a very small, inobtrusive, if that's the right word, unobtrusive consequence that just would affect this behavior. Again, when I think about the assembly, if a student didn't sit down the whole time, I certainly wouldn't make them lose a week's worth of recess, but instead I might go sit next to them, or I might have them come sit next to me. And again, making those consequences appropriate. Again, with the assembly, not losing recess isn't really appropriate, but some other kind of consequence in the moment of the situation would be far more appropriate. So now, if a behavior, good or bad, continues, it means it's being reinforced and serving some kind of a function. So we can investigate this by taking note of the ABCs of behavior.
Absolutely. And I believe it was Lori with the question about habitual truancy. Is that right? So I think, Lori, this is a piece that comes to mind when I'm thinking of your student, and with a lot of behaviors, just looking at those ABCs of behavior. So let's kind of look through this, and anytime we're looking at a behavior that persists, like Joanne said, there's a reason. They're getting something out of it, so to speak. So we want to just kind of investigate that contingency. Now, someone with many more letters behind their name than me can do a functional behavior analysis, but we're just looking here at, which is kind of a full-blown big scope picture. But we are even looking here just kind of a snapshot of the situation. Maybe somebody else, a second pair of eyes, coming in and taking a peek at just what's happening in the ABCs. So when we talk about the ABCs of behavior, we're talking about A as the antecedent, and we'll just go through first just kind of a general overview. And the antecedent, and then B is the behavior, and C is the consequence. So when we're looking at these three pieces, the C being the consequence, when we're looking at these three pieces, the antecedent is anything that happens before the behavior. The behavior, of course, we're referring to the student's behavior here, and the consequence is what happens after, or the response. So let's investigate each of these pieces just a little bit more closely. So an antecedent is what happens before the behavior. It's the context or environment. It could be who is around. It could be what is said, and it's the time, or it could be the time of day or activities that are occurring.
You know, your question about truancy reminds me of an instance I had a few years ago in my classroom. I had a young lady who probably missed 3 to 4 days of school every single week. And of course, as a result, she was way behind academically. But when we took a look at her situation, it just so happened that her dad was out of the house, her mom worked night hours, and she was at home alone with older sisters. And the only time she had to be with her mom was during the school day. And so that, when we realized that, we could work out a system where we could have her, in a way, have more time with her mom, but still not miss so much school. So sometimes thinking about what could be the cause of that truancy might help to open up some solutions to the problem.
That's nice. And that's really looking at that antecedent, the who and the what and the where, the behavior. And then there was a situation I heard about recently when I was traveling around this summer training, and there was a little girl who, there was a school psychologist who was asked to go in and observe, and she was given very little information. It was, come observe this little girl. There is a lot of behavior that's happening, and I don't know if she was upper elementary or middle school. And come observe, there is some crazy behavior. So the person said, okay. So she went in and she observed, and she went to this one classroom, and there was nothing. I mean, she really saw very little behavior. The child really met all the expectations of everyone else. She was like, oh, that's weird. Changed classes, went to the next class. Oh, and that classroom was just a classroom that had a lot of girls in it for whatever reason. Went on to the next class, and the little girl's sitting there, and she was doing her stuff, and all of a sudden, a boy stood up and walked past. And this child reached up, grabbed her ponytail out of her hair, pulled it off, and began to swing her hair around. It was like a Pantene Pro-V commercial. Arched her back, and the psychologist was like, whoa, that's what we're talking about. So the antecedent here is boys, the addition of boys. So just sometimes those little things give us some added information. So just kind of who's there, what's going on, maybe the where of the environment. So when we're taking a look, then we have got to look at the behavior. When we're looking at the ABCs of behavior, it's important when we look at behavior to think about it as anything that can be seen, heard, or measured. So we want to make sure that we're being very specific and not using vague terms. So, for instance, behavior wouldn't be something that's like angry or sassing or he was being aggressive. So, for instance, that you see in front of you, you have a bad attitude. That doesn't give us a lot of information. However, if we were to describe behavior as if we're holding a mirror up to it and being very specific on what we see or hear, it might sound like you're rolling your eyes, or you're mumbling under your breath, or I see you stomping your feet, or you're sighing, or you push a paper away. So behavior being very specific and clear, and also it helps because it's objective. It's not putting any subjective terms on the child. It's just looking at what they did, not them. And then when we look at the ABCs, we look at the consequence. When we say consequence, a lot of times what people think of are maybe punishments or some kind of what I would call an applied consequence, like sitting out for recess or from a preferred activity. Or sometimes on a positive consequence note, like PBIS tickets for schools who have PBIS tickets or whole class or whole school rewards. Consequences are even greater than that. When we say consequence, what we mean is just a response to behavior. It's a result of behavior that affects whether the behavior is more or less likely to be repeated in the future. And so it's not just merely all those little things that we think about, but it really affects whether or not it's going to occur again. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look here at this. We've got a scenario, and let's see if you guys can identify the ABCs in this scenario.
Okay, you have 3 poll questions, and in each poll question, go ahead and identify the antecedent, the behavior, what happened before the behavior, the actual behavior, something that you can see, hear, or measure, and the consequence, what immediately follows or influences the behavior.
Exactly. In the scenario you've got up here, and the scenario is the students are at their desks when the teacher asks the question. Maddie blurts out the answer as she raises her hand. The teacher acknowledges and repeats Maddie's answer.
And sorry about that, guys. I was a little slow opening the poll. I noticed some of you shared your answers privately in the chat, but if you want to just go ahead and answer in the poll, and then we'll share those answers out in just a few minutes. Thank you to everyone who's already answered the polls. We'll just take a couple more seconds and let people finish up, and then we will continue on and talk about the answers.
What percentage are we at here?
So it looks like we only have 2 or 3 people that are still finishing. So
very good.
I will go ahead and let's start talking about those answers. So for number 1, what is the antecedent? We have about 60% say the teacher asks a question, and the others say, well, the others haven't answered yet. So the majority are saying that it is C.
Okay, the teacher asks a question, and that's what we have as well, that's the antecedent. So right before that behavior of the blurting out, what we see is the teacher asks a question. And could it be that the students are at their desk? That's absolutely a piece, an environmental piece. But the teacher asks a question, and then we see the resulting behavior, which is, what did people say for behavior?
I apologize. I have oh, never mind. We had about 70% this time say that the behavior was Maddie blurts out the answer.
Excellent. Very good. Absolutely. So that's the behavior. And so then we want to look at, well, okay, we know that in most of our classrooms, that's not what we want. We don't want students to blurt out, yes, she raised her hand, but she blurted out anyway. So how do we respond to that behavior? And in this situation, what was the consequence or response?
So about, again, you guys are right on track. About 70% of people said the consequence was teacher repeated Maddie's answer.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like that was our reporting. So nobody chose anything else, but everyone who responded chose the teacher repeats Maddie's answer. Absolutely. And so when we look at that and we step back and think about it, we go, because in visiting a lot of classrooms, this is oftentimes what we see. I feel like sometimes that blurting out piece is like the kryptonite in classrooms. A lot of teachers see it, and a lot of teachers want to see it go away. But then when we analyze, oh, this is what's happening, my follow-up question to you is, what is likely to happen in the future because of this consequence? So you guys can toss that out in the chat box. What's likely to happen in the future because of this?
And absolutely, the answers I'm seeing come in is she's going to blurt out again.
Yep.
We reinforce that negative behavior, and that's going to keep happening.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as a teacher, we don't always realize that we're doing that. And I see somebody just wrote in as well, not only will it continue, but it'll encourage others to do the same. And that's true. And I know as a teacher, sometimes, it's like, oh, we're just so glad that somebody knew the right answer. So we don't always stop to think about it behaviorally, but we don't want her to blurt out. So let's see how we might change this up a little bit. So if we look at, this is kind of what happened, our scenario. So the teacher says, can someone please raise their hand and tell me which word in this sentence is the verb? We see our sentence on the board. So Maddie raised her hand. Looks like she's covering her mouth, but she's not. She's raised her hand, yelled out, jumped. And the teacher says, great job, Maddie. Thanks for sharing. So instead of reinforcing the behavior with that response, let's see if we can change that consequence. And so this part is going to be the same. Teacher asks the same question. Maddie has the same behavior, yells out, jumped, raised her hand. And the teacher instead this time says, remember to wait until I have called on you to answer, please. Jimmy, what do you think the answer is? And he says, jumped. And when we look at that, that is a very kind, not calling her out on the carpet, so to speak, but way of changing up that response that's hopefully going to be less likely to have Maddie yell out in the future.
I just wanted to share one more response to the chat question, and I think this is a good point. Other students may get upset that they weren't allowed to answer the question.
Exactly.
So it's just going to breed more conflict within the classroom.
Exactly. It seems unfair, and those tolerances are and the expectations just begin to get wishy-washy. Absolutely. But when we respond in a way similar to this, but then still show that support of Maddie, next time, like, hey, Maddie, I saw your hand was raised. Do you have anything else to add? Or calling on her the next one. Absolutely, we can still support her in kind ways, and we want to do that. We want to make sure and be clear with what our expectations are. So how we respond to behavior demonstrates our tolerances so much.
Yeah, so much more than merely saying what we expect. So we can use consequences, both positive and negative, to help change students' behavior. Always remember, we can't control a child's behavior, but we can control our response. And it's this response to behavior that affects its outcome. Remember, if a negative behavior persists, it's likely it's being reinforced. So if we take a look at the ABCs of behavior, we can alter our response or consequence to affect the future occurrence of this behavior. So let's share again in the chat box. Type out some consequences you use when students show desired prosocial behavior.
I love all of the participation from you guys. You are, don't tell anyone this, but you're the best webinar audience we've had.
Yay!
So let's see what we've got. We've got specific praise. Great, Veronica. Listen to music on the iPod. That's a great one.
Wonderful.
And it's free. That's always good for teachers.
Free ones are good.
We're getting a lot of verbal praise.
Specific praise. I love that, being very specific about what they did well.
Can you give an example of what specific praise would be?
Absolutely. So many of us are familiar with praise. Good job, awesome, the happy dance, high five, thumbs up. Specific praise is just pairing that awesome or whatever that is with the behavioral description of what they did. So awesome job, raising your hand quietly. Nice job, in line. Look how still your feet are. Something like that. It tells them exactly what they do. And then the high school response, hey, nice job getting your homework in on time, man.
Another thing, and this I think goes into Joanne's next point, is nonverbal. It doesn't have to be verbal. It can just be something small.
Right. A smile, a wink, a thumbs up, a little pat on the back, all of those can be very powerful.
Absolutely. And, the fist bumps, that kind of stuff, you just see kids' faces light up. And I'm even thinking, those high school students of mine.
Well, I love this answer. I have to share it from Ava. She's kind of getting ahead of us. And we'll talk about this in a second, but she suggested principal talk time. She said one student loved meeting with the principal. When they showed appropriate behavior, she was allowed to go see her principal for a few minutes in the afternoon. Now, we'll talk about this in a second because for some students, that wouldn't be a positive consequence.
Right.
But we will get to that. So great job, Ava.
That is you're right, absolutely. Sometimes that isn't a positive, but it can build a good relationship with a student who typically goes to see the principal for negative reasons. Giving them the opportunity to go see them for a positive reason can be very powerful in changing behavior.
And I've seen them do that, even watch a little bit of a Netflix or with either the principal or with a counselor and play a game with a peer, which of course this child struggled with peer interactions anyway. So to be able to have such a positive mentor time, so to speak, with a trusted adult and a friend, it's just priceless.
And I'm glad you mentioned the counselor as well, because there are going to be other significant adults in the building that can be good mentors, somebody to get positive conversation with. And that could be the lunch lady, or it could be the gentleman who monitors the recess, or the greeter at the door, or even a previous teacher. Those are all great adults to have that used as a positive consequence.
Exactly. And I hate to move on from this because we've had tons of great suggestions, but we need to move into the next subject. What I am going to do is after the webinar, I'm going to share with you some of our suggestions for free positive consequences, and I will also share some of what people have been sharing in the chat box, just so you guys maybe have some new ideas to use with your students.
Fantastic.
Great, thank you. So to recap, positive consequences can be nonverbal praise, like a thumbs up, verbal praise, like a good job, or specific praise, like good job, you raised your hand. We also have a positive communication home, a note and a planner, and that can be very powerful, especially with those students will probably or most likely struggle in your classroom. Anytime we can start off with as much positive communication at home, it then tends to make those interactions with students where you have to talk about negative behavior go a little bit more smoothly, because they've already seen that you care for their child and you're just looking out for what's best for that child. And then the last one we have is to choose your seat or sit around the room. Now, let's go on to the next chat question. Let's list out some consequences you have for when students have negative, undesired behavior.
That's a good one, Ava. Just a verbal warning.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need to be big.
No, just letting them know you saw and what the next action will be.
Okay, I know this is kind of going backwards, but I love your guys' ideas. Kara suggested on the positive communication home, actually allowing the student to call the parent themselves from the school. I love that.
Nice.
Because then the kids are really getting involved.
Absolutely.
And what parent doesn't want to hear good things from their kid?
Exactly.
And the cutest thing of that is just seeing how proud kids are when they can make that positive call home.
And though alternatively, bring it back then to this chat question, the exact same thing, having a child call home for an inappropriate behavior is extremely powerful as well.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got some other good suggestions coming in. Simple redirection.
Yes.
Restating the rules. Specifically pointing out the behavior.
Very good. Yeah. Again, just holding a mirror up, because sometimes, especially when we've got our kids who are impulsive, they don't always realize that they're doing it, and they're not trying to fill in the blank. They're not trying to be disruptive or cause your entire day to crumble. They're just doing what they do, and they didn't even realize it. So very nice.
Very good. Okay, there's a couple more I want to point out. I like, these are kind of the same from Gwen and Michelle, problem-solving sessions or a peace circle / or a class meeting is really good. This one I like is having the student repeat the rule that they've broken, so that they have to, communicate. Yes, I know I broke that rule.
And that helps the teacher to know too that they've made a connection. Yes. They know what rule that they broke.
Yes.
That's a great formative assessment for behavior.
Just a couple more. Again, you guys are doing awesome, and I'll share these with you. There's one I want to point out, and they say we use a strike or a timeout system. The only thing we suggest with that is if it is a strike or you have a red, yellow, green, that they have an opportunity to move back up within the same day.
We call that positive correction, and the reason we do that is we want to give kids some sort of buy-in to correct their behavior. Because, we totally want to send the message that when you do something incorrect, or choose an undesired behavior, that's not okay. But at the same time, we want to allow them the opportunity to be invested in correcting behavior. So, for instance, quick little story, there was a kindergartner last year I heard about that, it was like week 2 of school. We were not in very far. There was a kindergartner who pretty first off in the morning, 30 minutes in, did something and the teacher said, you need to change your clip down to yellow. You need to take it down one because what you just did. And he looked at her and he said, look, let's just move it to red and call it a day. This is a 5-year-old. And so he clearly got the message that once it was done, and he had no hope. So we definitely want to show kids that actually their actions really do matter.
Definitely.
And I want to get back to that clip up and clip down chart. Those are so cute and so popular. But if you find that you use that in your classroom and it's not quite as effective, it could be that kids are clipping up for good behavior or clipping down for not so good behavior, but they don't really know exactly what their behavior is. So having a little conversation, a little chat with them about this is why you went up or this is why you went down can kind of help that be more effective.
Those specifics, awesome. And we've got a couple examples here, some ideas for negative consequences.
So we have, you can change seats, sit next to the teacher's desk, or in my example of the assembly, they could sit next to me during the assembly. Having a short conversation, completing some kind of a reflection sheet, and to finish work instead of some other preferred activity.
And a couple of you somebody mentioned the reflection sheet. And, if you sat through our Well-Managed Schools workshop before, if you've been trained, you've heard us talk about guided self-correction. It's a very similar process and form of questions. The only thing that we have in our guided self-correction that many of those reflection sheets don't have is the why piece, that cognitive link to the reason. So something to consider when you're implementing that.
Good point. Well, great sharing on those positive and negative consequences. When we think about making sure our consequences are truly effective, here are some points to keep in mind. We want to make sure that they are individualized, that they are meaningful for the students. If it's not important to the student, then it's not likely to be a very effective consequence. We also want to make sure it's as immediate to the behavior as possible, because we know the closer it is to the behavior, the more powerful the more powerful it can be. But just know the age and developmental level can affect that immediacy. We know with the younger kids, the closer it is to the behavior, the consequences to the behavior, the more likely they're going to make that connection and know that the two are related. But also, when we think about older students, middle or high school, sometimes behaviors happen at inopportune times and you can't dole out the consequence right away. There might need to be some kind of a delay. We also want to make sure it's appropriate in amount or size. Remember, the smallest consequence necessary can affect the biggest changes. We want to make sure it's contingent on behavior, and that goes back to, I wouldn't want to give a positive consequence if something hasn't happened yet. And I think of my son in that case, one time and one time only. I paid him to mow the lawn before he actually mowed the lawn, and darn it, he never got around to it. So now I wait until after he mows the lawn before he gets paid. And then last, we want to talk about how to avoid deprivation and satiation. We want to make sure we have a number of consequences in our tool belt, because we know overuse of some consequences is going to lose their effectiveness. Losing recess all the time gets to the point where you figure, well, I'm never going to get it anyway, so I might as well misbehave. Or something such as extra computer time. If that tends to get boring, then, it's not so much of a positive consequence.
Too much for this thing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the important thing to keep in mind is that with consequences, always start small, especially when we think of those negative consequences. There's no reason to kill a fly with a bazooka. If a fly swatter is going to do just fine. You can use your list of Brainstorm Consequences to respond to students' behaviors, to help communicate your tolerances, to reinforce that desired behavior, and to discourage the undesired behavior. I sometimes see that schools just don't always have a full bank of consequences. So making sure that you do and post them, put them up, let the kids know, have it in print and revisit them. I just call it no surprises. Let the kids know the good things and the not so good things they might expect to receive. So we have talked about a lot, and you guys have been an amazing group of participants. Let's just recap. Our behavior matters. What we do is really what makes the biggest difference. Finding that right balance between tolerances, not too high and not too low. Really, when we see a behavior that we want to change, doing the ABCs of behavior and just looking and seeing what are they getting out of it, so to speak, changing our response to behavior and using consequences, both positive and negative, to shape behavior.
I know we are very close to going over time. So what I'm going to have Joanne do, I'm going to have her do our ending slide, and then we're going to come back to the questions. If you can stay on and want to ask any questions or see what people are asking about, that is great. I will try to recap some of these questions and email those to you again. And this will also be recorded, and you'll have access to that. So I apologize, we got a little wordy. I'm going to go to Joanne, and then we'll come back to questions.
Okay, as you go back and think about the things that we talked about today, if you have any questions or are looking for additional information, you can always go to our site, boystowntraining.org. We have a lot to offer. We have frequently asked questions, Ask the Trainer. We have other webinars that are free or at a small cost. And we're also on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yes.
Good stuff on there.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook. We share a lot of great stuff. I'm surprised. Oh, down in the corner at BT Ed. So that's where you can find us.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you ever need specific questions or have something that you want us to address with your staff, training needs, give John a call. He will help figure out what will fit best for your school. Here is his information. Again, boystowntraining.org will get you there as well. So I'm going to go back to questions. Again, thank you for joining us if you need to go. And if you have questions, go ahead and share those. And while you're sharing those, I want to go back to the question we received about truancy. One thing I did want to share, you guys, like I said, have been a great audience. And Jesus shared that at their school, they use parenting classes to address that truancy issue. Again, that's not going to work in every situation, but educating the parents about what the laws are, what the rules are, what their expectations are can help. And I also have a big, long list of resources. One of our trainers that was listening in popped in with a list of resources and stuff to help you, so I'm going to send that out to you. I believe that was Lori. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's
Lori.
I'm going to have to go through it. There's been so many names. So.
It was and some of it just kind of goes back to many of the things that we said, looking at even the suggesting of the more in-depth functional behavioral analysis, looking to make sure that there's follow-through and consistency and looking at those policies. But there's a really good list that we'll get out to you, Lori. Thanks for that question.
Yes, and Rochelle asked if John would be able to help with alternative education needs, and absolutely.
Yes.
We have several different options depending on what your school needs. So give John a call, let him know what's going on, and we can figure out something, whether it's training or we'll come in and just observe and see what's going on and figure it out. We will definitely be able to help you with that, Rochelle.
Absolutely.
I apologize. I do not want to say your name wrong. So we have someone who has asked about social skill curriculum, and I will include when I follow up a link to our Boys Town Press.
Yes.
And there are lots of resources there on our social skill curriculum, lots of books. Also on boystowntraining.org, we have several free lesson plans on social skills that actually blend social skills lessons into your academics.
Yeah, being a former teacher, I know that every minute is very important. So when we go to writing those plans that we put on Pinterest for free, we try to make them blended teaching and so that they meet academic standards as well as social skills standards as well. So what we've got available, like Samantha said, a lot of ideas, a lot of books. There are different books that have lesson plans in them if you want something to go from. We've also got some free resources if you want to get a hold of John. I've got some great ideas that we share out during trainings and things. And just in looking at lists of social skills, even when we come out and train, we talk about what are the different social skills and helping to identify a student's strengths and needs, and that helps us to be able to teach to their deficits.
Definitely. Any other questions today? You guys have been awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Let us know if you have any questions, concerns. On that website, there's a place where you can type in questions that our trainers will ask you. And I will, hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
Yeah, thanks guys for joining us today. You've been great.